back here with Yana Ludwig and talking about how Wyoming is such a red state and how can we move forward.
Yeah, and we have maybe some skepticism actually about how red this state actually is in some ways. I mean, the fascinating thing for me, so I'm running for U.S. Senate, and I'm doing it as an open socialist. And the S word has been I really think that what's happened is that you're just not allowed to talk about it, but so many people actually are socialists and don't even realize it. Like, they're totally down with localized, democratized economy. Like, that concept, nobody hates that concept, but there's been so much Red Scare stuff. And when I first started campaigning last summer, I go to this Progressive Voter Alliance group in Laramie, and I was being very it was so I'm a socialist, I want to explain what that means, and sort of being very kind of hesitant about the whole thing. And then a woman who I'd actually gone to church with for 2 years before this, and who I knew, pretty well, she came over and she said, "Oh, we're really all okay with socialism." And I was like, "What?" I wasn't really expecting that, but I feel like as I've gotten out there and talked more to people, I really think that what's happened is that word was so verboten for so long, and now, and I don't know, I mean, you two are in the press, so maybe you have longer perspective on this than I have, but I certainly feel like it's getting talked about more in the last 6 months in the press, and that you're starting to see more people coming out and calling people on it when they do the kind of red baiting thing. And so I feel like we're kind of already winning to some extent with, starting to open up some of these conversations that really haven't been allowed to be had before.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of people that I do talk to on Facebook, etc., they don't want the government to have so much control over us. They want states to have control over their own stuff. They want people to have control over their own things. But they're not understanding that that's what that means.
Right. Well, and the option is corporate control. I mean, that's sort of the most stark thing for me about the whole Medicare for All conversation is so you can give your money to corporations in the form of private insurance, and then they're going to gatekeep whether you get insurance coverage or not, and it's totally profit motivated. Or we can have the government be the ones who are paying the bills. They wouldn't own all the medical clinics in the country. They'd just be paying the bills. And so you really prefer paying a whole bunch of extra money to let somebody gatekeep it, or just having everything be covered? And yes, it would be a government program. That's really preferred. And most people, when they actually think that through, are maybe not,
I think part of the debate is about labels. I think a lot of people, it's easy to go by when you're branded this, or when you see that letter by the end of the name, or you hear certain call words, whether it's conservative, liberal, those are kind of used as broad strokes. How do you get past, or how do you encourage people to get past that, to look at the things that the details behind that stuff?
Well, I mean, I think for me it goes back to listening more than telling, and really trying to understand why someone has the orientation that they have and have the perspective that they have, and and that's not going to win every time, but it's we also don't have to change everybody's minds in one fell swoop and in one election cycle. I mean, I think gradually moving things to a more open place about some of these ideas, I think, ought to be the goal. We're not going for an 80% win on these elections or something. I mean, we're going for making significant gains electorally, and hopefully some of those gains will plop over that, the margin where we actually win some more seats and actually be able to start having different conversations. It's so frustrating hearing the level of conversation that's happening in Cheyenne right now around some of these bills, where it's people can just say factually wrong stuff about abortion and pregnancy, and there's not enough people there going, "Not science, that is not science," and so we have to, I think, take those gains and gradually change some of the conversations. But I've been pretty stunned by how fast I think some conversations are changing right now in the state.
So with that, do you want to take an opportunity to kind of educate people what the difference is between the S word and the C word?
Yeah, I mean, so
And define terms.
And socialism and communism.
and communism. The other C, I thought you meant
No,
capitalism.
communism.
Communism. Well, you know.
I can think of a few more.
Yeah, I mean, there's yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so the lines are not 100% like black and white between those two things. I mean, the original thing was that, you know, Marx said that socialism was a step on the way to communism, and communism was more about state ownership. None of this has anything to do with democracy or state control, though. I mean, when you're talking about capitalism, socialism, and communism, you're talking about economic structures, not decision-making structures. And so, you know, I think part of the problem is that the scary examples of communism that we've seen have also been accompanied by state control over decision making. And one of the phrases that you hear a lot in the socialist world right now is, you know, the idea that like democratic socialism is redundant, and it's like if it's not democratic, it's not socialism, is what a lot of people are saying increasingly in that world. And that's where I'm at. I mean, to me, like our power structure, our decision-making structure should be democratic, and our economy should be democratic too. And that's really, to me, what like socialism is, that second piece of that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like I don't want communist Russia either. No. Like that's not interesting to me either. And you know, I think that what you see in pockets of worker-owned cooperatives, you know, which is, to me, that's the interesting variation of socialism. Like, they're incredibly innovative. I mean, you know, people are very entrepreneurial in that world. I mean, it's not about getting rid of business or getting rid of markets. It's about who owns it and who economically benefits from it and who decides what happens with it. That's really what socialism is about. And that is not what capitalism is about. I mean, capitalism is 1% owning class control and decision making. And, you know, most people, I'm sure, present company accepted, most people hate their bosses, you know.
I like my boss.
So, you know, I mean, you don't like having somebody who has that kind of control over your life. And it's life and death for some people losing their jobs.
It is.
And, like, having somebody else have that control over your life, like, why would we want that? But that's the capitalism model, you know.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the examples that you've seen, even in just in Wyoming?
Of capitalism or of
social
worker ownership?
Yes.
Well, so here's the thing. So one of the things that we would need to change in DC is that you currently can't organize as a worker-owned cooperative in every state. So there's a thing in Wyoming called a close LLC.
Yeah.
That basically, you know, and I did this research on it like a year and a half ago, so I may derf some of the details here, but basically, as I understand it, it says that you have to have a consensus decision in order to be able to like close the company out. And so it has this one thread of like really strong, you know, shared ownership and shared decision making in it. And that's the closest we've got in Wyoming.
Okay.
You know, there's also different kinds of cooperatives. That word gets used for consumer co-ops, which is what we do have a number of in Wyoming. So the Big Hollow Food Co-op in Laramie is a consumer co-op, and so the consumers have an ownership share in it. And that's also a terrific model, but it's not the same thing as a worker-owned cooperative. Okay. So the language gets a little fuzzy sometimes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my talking points.
Cool. Well, and I mean, you two are in a position where you get to see a lot of stories and a lot of news come through. And so what do you think the leverage points are for like shifting, like we're talking about like shifting a state, a small amount or a large amount, you know, toward being open to more Democrat ideas or socialist ideas? What do you think?
I think definitely just keeping the word out there. I mean, yes, you have your talking points, and yes, you have to listen to other people, but coming like kind of just on fair ground. My aunt, for example, is extremely conservative. She's a very big Trump supporter, and although I don't like everything that she posts on her Facebook page, we have that open conversation, that honest conversation. I understand why she is such a big Trump supporter, but at the same time, I'm not sitting here feeding into it, you know? Kind of just being open, though. Like, I mean, honestly, my grandfather, another example, is a very, very huge Obama supporter. But you have to take, I mean, like you said, it is on policy. Like, you have to take what you like out of people and what you don't like out of people. I didn't like Obamacare whatsoever. I think that it's total BS that you get docked on your taxes for not having insurance.
Yeah.
I do like that Trump changed that. You know, I was out of insurance for 1 month.
Yeah,
this
the
year.
irony is he took
You know?
it back to what Obama
But-
wanted before it got like
Yeah.
rolled away, which is fascinating. And he'd probably be highly offended by that
But
recognition.
I know, but you know, there's things that I do like and there's things that I don't like about each person that's either running or, you know, I like the way that Obama is spoken. I like how educated he sounds. On the other hand, I don't like that about Trump. I don't feel like that he has that. But both people have good things about them and bad things about them, and you can't deny that.
I think self-education is what I
Yeah.
personally encourage people. I know the editorial board's sometimes had the bits where, well, the goal is to encourage people to look into the issues, dig deeper, be informed about where you come down on, whether it's know what the other side's argument is, so you can destroy it if you're so inclined. Or you can at least, or one of the things I always push for is that I want to know where people are coming from. I may not still agree with their conclusions,
Right.
but I want to be
Right.
able to see if I can follow their line of logic or their argument to see, I diverge with you, but I still can walk with you along the path.
Right,
And better understand that aspect of
That's
things.
interesting. One of my hats that I wear professionally is that I'm a consensus trainer, and one of the hardest things to get people to understand is that there is a difference between being heard and being agreed with, and I think we get really afraid of. We feel like we're like somehow granting ground if we hear and understand and can even reflect back to somebody what it is that they believe. And that's where people really feel like, okay, you're with me, you're in this conversation with me respectfully, but we get afraid of that because we think it's going to get interpreted as agreement. And it's like, I can completely disagree with you and still do that work that you're both talking about, you know, really like grokking where you're coming from and understanding what's driving it for you. The other thing I want to say is I think free press is really, really, really important.
Well,
and,
thank you.
You know, I mean, it's why my community started a podcast, is that we were like, there's not enough unaffiliated press stuff happening. And we have varying opinions about like different papers in the state and stuff, and I think it's, you know, different papers are in different places with this, but we really, you know, that's part of what we're about, is like we want to actually be, you know, being willing to be like unapologetically leftist about things, but also be fair and have things be factual, and like you actually like do our digging and do our work and like get people to tell their stories about how things are concretely affecting them. And I think it's really, really important. And that, you know, that's part of that humanizing instead of dehumanizing. And I think the press can do a lot of that. I think politics can do a lot of that.
Putting a face on these these stories. We
Yeah.
can run 90 inches on a topic, but if you don't have that little bit at the beginning to talk about this family or this woman's decision or this this father's angst, it's not going to impact the same.
Yeah, and actually having these conversations and not just copying, pasting what you see. That's very, very important to especially this community that we've found. So,
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah, we appreciate you.
Keep sharing the details that you'll find. We will keep trying to do our best to provide a platform to everybody to let them put their stories and their perspectives out there.
Lovely.
And I totally agree with you on humanizing rather than dehumanizing. I think that is my biggest advantage that I have on my social media pages. My when I'm sitting here talking to people is just, you know, showing compassion. I mean, literally, in my opinion, why I'm for Medicare for All is I'd be paying just as much as I'm paying now for Blue Cross Blue Shield in
For
taxes.
way better coverage.
Right, for way better coverage for one, but not only that, my mom and my dad, who, you know, they have to have private insurance because my dad owns a company, they would be getting that same amount, you know, and it's just kind of a fair game. Or, you know, the worker down at McDonald's, you know, a lot of the fast food places around here, they don't have health insurance. They don't give health insurance.
Right.
I want my friends to have health insurance. I want their kids to be healthy. I mean, I really, and I don't want them to be looked down on when they go into the hospital or when they go to the pediatrician, you know, for handing them a Medicaid card.
Right. There's so much shame wrapped up in social services that I think,
very much so.
That's one of the other reasons why I want everybody to be on the same system, is so that there isn't that kind of second-class citizen thing going on with it. For sure. And, you know, Wyoming's biggest employer is Walmart, right? And, like, none of those people have benefits. And, like, this was one of the most mind-blowing statistics about, like, capitalism gone really awry, is that, on average, every Walmart store costs the federal government $1 million a year in social services costs because they don't pay their people enough. It's fascinating. Anyway, so yes, compassion, getting everybody shame-free access to health care. Wouldn't that be a miracle? Yeah.
Well, that's change that you push for.
It's change that I'm pushing for, yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Good conversation. It. And thanks for coming and joining us at the Rocket Miner in Rock Springs, Wyoming.
Yes.
Thank you.